Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Roneen Davis, and I am a project manager at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Before we begin, I have a couple of technical notes. If you encounter connection or audio problems during this webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. We'll also post that number to the chat box on your screen. Unfortunately, there are some connection issues we may not be able to resolve during the webinar. However, we are recording today's webinar, and it will be posted on our website along with a copy of the slides that we used in today's presentation. On today's webinar, we're going to review the Second Chance Act Strengthening Relationships Between Young Fathers, Young Mothers, and Their Children grant program. Throughout the webinar, we encourage you to submit questions in the Q&A box on the bottom right corner of your screen. We will have time at the end of the webinar to address the questions you have submitted, and we'll do our best to get through as many questions as we can before we conclude today. So, joining me for today's webinar is Angela Parker, Program Manager with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. She'll be talking to you a little bit about the office later on in the presentation. So overall, this webinar will focus on the purpose of this grant and the technical assistance process, including the planning and implementation guide requirement. Everyone should have already taken part in a webinar presented by OJJDP on requirements for conducting research, and there will be another webinar in January to walk through OJJDP's grants management process, so please be on the lookout for that. After telling you a bit more about our organizations today, we will review the fiscal year 2017 cohort of grantees. We will then go over the grant program's history and expectations. We will then discuss the support available to you as Second Chance Act grantees, including technical assistance from the National Reentry Resource Center, before wrapping up today's presentation with time for questions. Please note that contact information for each presenter will be posted at the end of this webinar. So actually, I'm going to turn it over to Angela right now to tell you a little bit about the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention.
Hi, my name is Angela Parker, and I'm one of the program managers with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention in Washington, D.C. OJJDP envisions a nation where our children are healthy, educated, and free from crime and violence. If they come in contact with the juvenile justice system, the contact should be both just and beneficial to them. OJJDP provides national leadership coordination and resources to prevent and provide to juvenile delinquency and victimization. OJJDP supports states, communities, and travel jurisdictions in their efforts to implement effective preventive and intervention programs and to improve the juvenile justice system so that it protects public safety, holds offenders accountable, and provides treatment services tailored to the needs of juveniles and their families. Our role as program managers is to assist with the guidance and overseeing the progress of your grant awards surrounding implementation and operation to ensure you remain in compliance of the grant award requirements to best achieve the goals and objectives of your grant award set forth. However, a more detailed overview of our expectations will be provided during an actual grant management webinar. I believe that will be held sometime in January as we continue to review and clear the budget. Again, we as program managers are here for you during this entire process. Please feel free to reach out to us at any point. And I'm going to pass this back over to Ronan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. So just as another note on your funding agency, many of you may have received grants from other parts of the federal government prior to receiving this one. So I know that there are a lot of overlapping grants from the Department of Labor, from Housing and Human Services. Furthermore, there is often overlap in awards made by OJJDP and other DOJ offices, such as the Bureau of Justice Assistance. So just wanted to make a note, it's important to recognize that each of these federal offices takes a different approach to grants management, and that you might be operating similar projects through multiple federal awards, and what's important is to demonstrate how they are distinct from each other, primarily around how those results are being reported. But as Angela mentioned, there will be a future webinar that goes into more detail on the grants management process. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Justice Center. The Justice Center is a national nonprofit organization that serves policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels from all branches of government. Staff provides practical, nonpartisan advice and evidence-based, consensus-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. You can find our website at csgjusticecenter.org, and you can follow us on Twitter at CSGJC. In addition to serving policymakers, as I mentioned before, the Justice Center provides technical assistance to all Second Chance Act grantees through the National Reentry Resource Center, or NRRC, which is funded through the Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance. We are constantly adding new content and resources to our website, and we send out a monthly newsletter that provides information about the latest research, funding opportunities, distance learning events, and other news about reentry. We encourage everyone who hasn't done so already to sign up for the newsletter by going to csgjusticecenter.org/subscribe. Now I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate all of you on receiving this award. This grant is an exciting opportunity for community-based organizations like yours to support those returning from incarceration. So you see here on this slide all of the recipients of this year's grant for the Young Fathers category. And then on the next slide, you'll see the recipients of this award for the Young Mothers category. So you'll find that many of you have similar aspects of your programs, and while also taking different approaches. Part of our technical assistance process will be connecting you to the other grantees in your cohort to learn how different programs address those different challenges. So now we're going to take a little bit of time to review this grant program itself. So since 2014, OJJDP has awarded around $13.7 million to 34 community and faith-based organizations around the country to run programs supporting young fathers or mothers returning from incarceration. And this is just so everyone knows, this map also includes everyone, this current cohort of grantees, the 2017s as well. So you're represented on this. So under the Justice Center's Correction and Reentry Division, I work on the Community Initiatives portfolio, which provides technical assistance to all Second Chance Act grant programs awarded to nonprofit, community, and faith-based organizations. These grant recipients stand out because the majority of Second Chance Act grants are only awarded to units of government, such as departments of corrections or sheriff's offices. While many of them may subcontract with nonprofit agencies, only a select few Second Chance Act grant programs, like this one, are available directly to nonprofit agencies, including tribal and faith-based organizations. That means they're very competitive grants, and so it points to how awesome it is that you were able to secure one of these awards and how proud you should be of your program. These grants have historically required a mentoring component, including this program. In addition to your grant program, we also work with grantees who have received Second Chance Act funding from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, to run mentoring programs for adults and other reentry programs run by community-based nonprofits. BJA and OJJDP together have invested around $100 million of Second Chance Act funds in over 200 community and faith-based organizations to run reentry programs that incorporate mentoring. This funding has supported various programs across the country in 46 states and the District of Columbia. In addition to providing you with opportunities to share each other's successes, challenges, and strategies, your TA providers at the NRC can connect you with past and existing grantees around the United States to provide opportunities for peer sharing and learning. The goal of this program is to improve outcomes for young fathers and mothers. In addition to reducing recidivism, this program aims to support responsible parenting and healthy families. To achieve this goal, OJJDP expects programs to provide transitional and mentoring services that take into account the gender of the population being served. Services should be provided both pre- and post-release and meet the assessed risks, strengths, and needs of the population as assessed by validated criminogenic risk and needs assessment and other relevant tools. There are a number of factors that will need to be addressed when mapping out the services you will provide, including parent-specific education and ensuring your staff, the environment where programming takes place, and services are prepared to be gender responsive and trauma informed. While this may be a review, we just want to reiterate that the target population, whether you're serving father or mother figures, needs to be assessed as medium to high risk to reoffend. This shouldn't be confused with those deemed to be at a high risk of violence or based solely on a particular charge. There are validated assessment tools that can help you determine if someone is medium to high risk. Assessments can be conducted directly by the grantee or by the corrections partner, but risk must be risk to reoffend and be determined by a criminogenic risk assessment that has been validated. In addition to risk and need, participants in the program must be confined and under the age of 25 at the time of their enrollment in the program. It is important to determine the number of people you plan to serve based on actual estimates of the target population in the facilities you're going to be working with. It is also important to determine how you're going to define number served versus number enrolled or number of successful completions. So your grant programs are split into a planning and implementation phase. During the planning phase, you will have access to $50,000 of your award funds pending budget clearance and release of special conditions, which is, if you haven't already had conversations with your program managers at OJJDP about that, I encourage you to reach out to them, and as Angela mentioned, this will also be addressed in your grants management webinar. During this planning phase, you will work with your technical assistance provider to complete a planning and implementation guide, or P&I guide, that will be used to present your final program plan to OJJDP. Once submitted and approved by your OJJDP program manager, the remainder of your funds will be released. While the solicitation stated that programs will have up to 12 months for planning, please note that planning phase length goes into effect after your budget is cleared and will be different for different grantees and is flexible based on each program's needs. The planning phase is an opportunity to build capacity, establish baseline information, and utilize the P&I guide to identify how the program can be stronger, to flesh out ideas in the proposal, and guide your work with your TA provider. It is important to utilize this planning phase to ensure your program is in a strong place to get started. Many grantees, understandably, feel the need to get started right away. Let this planning phase be an opportunity to make sure you've worked out certain kinks like contract finalization and relationship building, and work with your TA provider to ensure plans are in place to address areas of the program that may need a little more work even as you move into implementation. So now we're going to take some time to actually review the P&I guide. As I mentioned before, this is a required deliverable for the planning phase of your grant. In addition to that, it can be a very helpful tool for your project team and your TA provider. The P&I guide is a tool that is meant to flesh out the ideas put forth in your proposal and identify strengths and areas for improvement. It will help to establish baseline information about the proposed program and help your TA provider target their assistance. One key benefit of the guide is that it provides a single document to reference key programmatic information. While further details may be laid out in program manuals and policy and procedure documents, the P&I guide will be a good reference point for program staff and partners to grasp what the program is trying to accomplish. Keep in mind that the guide should be a living document that you can update as changes occur, whether they are small adjustments or formal changes that will require approval from OJJDP. After receiving the guide, please fill it out being as accurate, clear, and concise as you can. You should be bringing in program partners for the parts of the guide that address their involvement in the program, such as your corrections agency, evaluator, or treatment provider. You will have monthly calls with your TA provider throughout the course of the grant. During the planning phase, you will work with your TA provider to determine which exercises to address on which call. Please send completed exercises to your TA provider in advance so they can provide feedback and focus on priority areas during the calls. If something changes from what was originally put in the guide, make a note of that and be sure to discuss it with your TA provider. Lastly, it is important to provide or develop documentation. You'll find the questions in the P&I guide often end with, where is this documented, or what is the plan to document this information? For instance, when discussing the process for recruiting participants, Think about whether this process is documented in a program guide or a policy and procedure manual that can be shared with your corrections partner or new staff who are learning how the program works. If you have existing documentation, please provide that to your TA provider and note it in the guide. So here you'll see an overview of the different sections of the guide. It is important to think critically about your proposed program, and I encourage you to have an open dialogue with your TA provider as they learn about your area's unique systems and challenges. So now we'll walk through each of these sections briefly, but your TA provider will be able to go into more depth on each section of the guide. So section 1 will cover basic information about your program, including goals for the program and a list of partner agencies. The guide will ask for specific information about how partners will be involved and the strategy for maintaining regular communication with them. Section 2 will dig into your eligibility criteria, why that criteria was selected, and how it will be assessed, including what risk and needs assessments are being used and who is administering them. This section will also ask you to describe in detail how participants are recruited and enrolled into the program. Now, the real meat of the program will be examined in sections 3, 4, and 5, which all of these address service provision in some way. This includes what individual services are provided and whether they are grant funded, whether they're provided in-house or by referral, which ones are evidence-based. It will also examine how your program is or will be trauma-informed, how case management is structured, and go into your processes for mentoring, including mentor recruitment and training. Please keep in mind that when you're answering questions like how the program is trauma-informed, be detailed. Describe the type of training that staff receive, who's conducting the training, what agencies you've partnered with to assist in developing either that training or other protocols, and what quality assurance measures are in place. Section 5 is slightly different for young mothers versus young fathers grantees. Both cover family-focused support and how various issues will be addressed, including parenting strategies, relationship skills, child support, and intimate partner violence. For young mothers grantees, this section has an emphasis on gender-responsive support. When reviewing this, think about how your program services, staff training, and the programmatic environment account for the population that you're serving. Section 6 deals with program evaluation and data collection. Program evaluation is crucial. It shows where your program is effective, where it needs work, and helps you to improve future programming. If you are not conducting research as defined by OJJDP, please fill out this section with the support of staff who will be overseeing data collection. If you are utilizing an evaluator and conducting research, you can skip this section and fill out Appendix B, which is listed there at the bottom right. For this, you will need your evaluator. This section will help you to establish the beginnings of an evaluation plan, including laying out specific indicators that will be examined. While it is important to track participant recidivism, your evaluation should be robust and examine various outcomes related to your program goals, such as achieving long-term housing or sustainable employment, or whether having a mentor improves program engagement. The last section of the guide, section 7, covers sustainability. It is never too early to start thinking about this topic. It's important to build resources and plan for the end of the grant early on. Start thinking about which aspects of the program could continue without Second Chance Act funds and what other funding sources you will be exploring. The P&I guide also provides a template for developing a logic model, as you'll see there as Appendix A. However, if you already have one, please send a copy to your TA provider and you won't need to fill out that particular template in the P&I guide. All right. Sorry, one moment here. Okay. I apologize about that. Now we're going to talk about how you'll be supported in meeting the expectations that we just discussed. So there are 3 primary agencies that will provide you with support. OJJDP, as you know, is your funder and the primary contact for any issue related to the functioning of your grant. Any questions regarding budget adjustments, changes in your scope of work, no-cost extensions should go to OJJDP. As you're currently going through right now, any questions regarding the budget clearance process or budget approvals, that also goes through your OJJDP program managers. The NRC is contracted by the Department of Justice to provide technical assistance, and I will go into that a little bit more in a little bit. Primarily, though, we are your contacts for programmatic support. Lastly, there is Booz Allen, which is also contracted by the Department of Justice to manage your performance measurement tool, and they can provide technical support with the reporting process. All right, so every grantee is assigned a technical assistance lead from the NRRC who will assist you in completing the P&I guide. They'll also support the development and implementation of the content of your program, help you assess your progress, and link you to other grantees and the field to share successes and common challenges. So here, this slide covers the Young Fathers grantees. It looks a little bit complicated and colorful, but I'll walk you through it. Here you'll see who your assigned TA provider is. There are 3 of us, Derek Lowry, Jan Dela Cruz, and myself. We all have been working with Young Fathers grantees for some time now, and we have each worked with a number of other types of grantees, including Derek's work with Young Mothers grantees and Jan's work with Adult Mentoring grantees. You'll also see here your assigned OJJDP program manager. So it's broken up into two big columns here. We have Patrick Dunkhorst's grantees and Angela Parker's grantees, and then within each of those you'll see who your assigned TA provider is. Excuse me. And just a note, we're also going to be posting this webinar on our website along with the PDF of the slides. So if you're worried about getting all the right contact information, we'll be able to provide that to you. So this next slide is for the Young Mothers grantees. So you'll see on the left is Patrick Dunkhorst's grantees, and on the right are Angela Parker's, and you'll also see who your assigned TA provider is for these grantees. I'll leave that up just for a moment here. All right. So though you will have one primary TA contact with the NRRC, we do work as a team and draw on each other's areas of expertise. We also stay in regular contact with OJJDP to coordinate our assistance to you. And as you can see, these are the different areas that the NRRC TA will be covering. We've already talked a lot about the P&I guide. We'll also be working with you to identify measures and strategies for tracking progress, content and facilitation support, supporting the development of implementation and sustainability plans, and sharing your successes with stakeholders, the field, and other grantees. We do post articles on successes on our website, so I definitely encourage you to check out other grantees that have been profiled on our website. Our technical assistants can look a variety of ways. Each grantee will have monthly calls with their TA provider throughout the course of the grant. We also regularly host and distribute webinars and opportunities to interact with other grantees. In addition to this, based on the needs of your program, we may be able to provide expert trainings on a number of issues, including risk needs responsivity, gender responsiveness, the intersection of behavioral health and reentry, sustainability, and various other topics. Sometimes grantees will benefit from a site visit where TA providers, and in some cases consultants, will work with program staff on the ground to address specific challenges. So next steps for technical assistance. Your TA lead should have already reached out to you by now to set up your introductory calls. During your first call with your TA provider, you will have a chance to talk about your program and any changes from the original proposal that you anticipate. Your TA provider will also take this time to walk through the P&I guide process with you. All right, and then, sorry about that. So in addition to walking through your P&I guide and reviewing any changes that happen in your proposal, one thing we also want to accomplish on that introductory call is establishing who the primary contacts are going to be for your grant. So oftentimes we have financial officers that are listed as the primary contact. Sometimes it's the executive director of an agency. If you are currently hiring or have already hired a program coordinator or program manager, please make sure to note that when you talk to your TA provider so that they can reach out to the primary person overseeing the program. They will also work with you to determine who should be on which monthly TA calls. Sometimes it will require the finance person to be on that call. Sometimes it will require an evaluator to be on that call. It just depends on the content of that call and what issues are being addressed at that time. So be sure to work with your TA providers on that. So the last next step there is working with OJJDP on the budget and special conditions clearance. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have been in touch with OJJDP so far, but please remember to reach out to Angela or Patrick with any questions about that process, and be on the lookout for the grants management webinar, which will provide you with more information about how to clear those special conditions and how to address any other issues that pop up in the grants management process. So I do want to highlight a few different resources for you that you should be aware of that might be helpful for your program. With support from the Bureau of Justice Assistance earlier this year, the NRC released the publication Mentoring as a Component of Reentry, Practical Considerations from the Field. In collaboration with an advisory group consisting of past grantees, researchers, peer mentors, and correctional professionals, as well as the NRRC's history of working with over 150 organizations, we were able to provide 5 areas of consideration for community-based organizations looking to provide mentoring services in their reentry program. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list or a step-by-step guide, but rather a reflection of lessons learned that can serve as a valuable resource for the field. This publication provides information on integrating mentoring into a reentry program, collaborating with corrections, probation, and parole, identifying and addressing reentry needs, equipping mentors to support reentry goals, and evaluating mentoring services. This is available as a PDF document on our website. And if you want to find it very easily, feel free to reach out to your TA provider. They can send you a link to it. In addition to mentoring as a component of reentry, the NRC has a variety of other resources that your TA provider can connect you to, including information on reentry and employment, behavioral health, and housing. In addition to the NRRC resources, these are some valuable resources outside the NRC to be aware of. These include crimesolutions.gov and the National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices, which provide information on evidence-based practices and curriculum. The National Reentry Resource Center is a project funded by OJJDP that provides technical assistance and support to mentoring programs with a focus on youth. In addition to the National Reentry Resource Center, there is the Center for Evidence-Based Mentoring and its associated newsletter, The Chronicle, both of which provide valuable information on the latest research as well as updates and trends in the mentoring field. So at this time, we'll go ahead and take questions. Please remember to use the Q&A box or the chat box on the bottom right corner of your screen. And just a note that all the contact information for your TA providers as well as your program managers is up on the screen right now, so you'll be able to take that down. But as we mentioned before, we will post a PDF of these slides and make them available to you in the coming week. All right, so we'll go ahead and take questions. All right, there was one question just about the P&I guide. We do see this a lot, so it was about how long it takes for that to be approved. Just so everyone knows, you do have that 1-year planning phase, and so it's entirely possible that throughout the course of that, while working with your TA provider, you might complete that sooner. It might take a little bit longer depending on the situation. Once it's submitted to OJJDP, it depends on a number of factors. So we've seen it take different amounts of time. It could be a couple of weeks, it could be a month. It does have to go through not only your program manager, but also the finance office to approve. But it does vary depending on when it's completed and when it's submitted. Okay. And it looks like kind of a slow question day, which is perfectly fine. I just saw a question about who should be on TA calls. I think I mentioned before, you definitely want your program manager or program director, whoever's in that role of coordinating the day-to-day operations of the program. But in certain situations, it may make sense to bring other people into the call. So I just encourage you to talk to your parents, sorry, not your parents, we just had a grantee whose name is parents pop up on the question field. Talk to your TA provider about who should be on that call. So again, you might find situations where you are going to be discussing evaluation, performance measurement. That's a great opportunity to bring your evaluator onto the call. If you're talking through certain case management practices and how your program works through maybe the recruitment and the pitching of your program to participants, it might be helpful to have case managers on the call for that, or to bring a corrections partner in when talking about that relationship. So I just encourage you to talk to your TA provider about that. There was a question about performance measures. If you have specific questions about what you should be reporting on, you'll need to reach out to OJJDP. They can provide the link to the performance measurement tool that you'll be reporting through, and you'll be able to see what the specific measures are that they're looking for. I do encourage you to think through what you want to report on for your program as well. So depending on what your program is focusing on, if you have an employment component, if you have a housing component, because your programs are focusing on parents, what type of performance measures are you looking at that address strengthening relationships between parents and their children, parents and their co-parents? If you're working with a lot of parents who have child support orders, is your program helping to move them to a better place to pay those orders, that sort of thing. All right. Okay, so we got a question about some difficulty contacting a TA provider. I know we've had some email issues on our end, so we'll be able to follow up with you directly about that. There was a question about if there will be any travel requirements for this grant. I don't believe there are, but maybe I'll just double check with Angela if you're on the line. Do you know if there are any travel requirements for this grant, for instance, for conferences or meetings with OJJDP?
No, I don't have any here in my notes that we have officially, but give me a couple minutes. I'm going to do a check real fast, and I'll be right back with you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Angela. I will say, I think in the past with this particular grant, there weren't travel requirements. However, I think there is a provision to set aside some funds for sometimes it's a conference, sometimes it's a training event that we'll put on together with OJJDP. There's nothing scheduled at this moment, but be on the lookout for that. And as you're working on your budget with either Angela or Patrick, you can touch base with them about how much should be set aside, if anything should be set aside this year for that, because I know it does change from year to year depending on the grant cohort. Someone was asking about who their program manager is for this on the OJJDP side, so I'll just go back to that slide so everyone can take a look at it. If you're a Young Mothers Grantees, so we can actually go through this really quick. If you're the Young Mothers Grantees, we have the Texas Offender Reentry Initiative, or Metroplex Economic Development Corporation, Lutheran Social Services, Pathfinders of Oregon, Friends of Island Academy, Children of Inmates, and Springfield Urban League. You're all under Patrick Dunkhorst. The Family Tree Information, Education and Counseling Center, and Parents, you are all under Angela Parker, who's on the webinar with us today. And then you'll see here for the Young Fathers, so Family Services of Westchester, Goodwill of Southwestern PA, Technical Assistance Partnership of Arizona. I know you're also partnering with Father Matters, Total Action for Progress, Children of Inmates, and Springfield Urban League. You are all under Patrick Dunkhorst. And we have Change Happens, the George Gervin Youth Center, VOA of Greater New Orleans, Urban League of Rochester, Urban League of Greater Atlanta, and Children's Friend and Service. You are all under Angela Parker. So again, if you weren't able to catch that, or there's other people you need to share that information with, we will be posting the PDF of these slides. You can also reach out to your TA provider, who can provide you with that information as well. I'll go back to our contact info right here. All right. See if there's any other questions coming in. It doesn't look like it. I'm just going to check in with Angela really quick if there is anything else you wanted to add on that travel piece or anything else.
No, I don't have any. I can't seem to find anything in here that clearly states that they must or attend any type of training where it consists of travel. However, we still, in all of our solicitations, place that request that they do a set-aside. And what we do is we ask them to make sure that they do put like a couple days of travel from their designation to Washington, D.C., and just kind of use the per diem for Washington, D.C. as like a, what do you call it, like a guide or something generic so that we can have those funds set aside. And towards like the middle ending of your grant, if we see, or during the process of your grant, tenure of your grant award, if we see where there will be no request for you to travel and you can move those, then we will give you the okay to reallocate those funds to a different line item.
Okay, great.
But that conversation you can have with your individual program manager while we're going through the budget process.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I hope that was helpful.
I think it was. And you know, as Angela said, if you do have additional questions about how much money to set aside, if you set it aside now and it turns out an event doesn't come up and you're wondering if you can move that around, just make sure to have that conversation with Angela or Patrick. There was a question about more information on criminogenic risk assessment before enrollment. So because the requirement of the grant is that you are serving medium to high risk individuals, you do want to verify that they've been assessed as medium to high risk to reoffend based on a validated risk assessment. So it depends on your situation and the jurisdiction you're in. In some cases, we've seen that it's the corrections partner that has an assessment that they use, and they can share that information with you. In other situations, they may not have their own risk assessment, and so it's the nonprofit who got the grant who conducts it themselves. I will say there's one situation with it's an adult mentoring grantee, but their corrections partner has their own risk assessment that they use, and that was how the initial score level was determined before they were recruited for the program. But then they didn't get the actual information from the assessment from the correction partner. They just got the score. So then they implemented their own assessment, and since they were serving women, they found a gender-responsive risk assessment to use. And then they would use that not only to confirm the risk score, they would also use it to help determine needs for like how they would do their case management to address the specific needs that came up in the risk assessment. So that's a few things to keep in mind there. So you may be partnering with your corrections partner to get that information. You may be doing it yourself, but you do want to ensure that they are medium to high risk because that's one of the requirements for enrolling into the program.
Hello, Ronan.
Yes.
Hello. Hi, this is Angela. I did go back into the actual solicitation, and they do have a blurb here that states all applicants are required to allocate $7,000 to support travel costs associated with technical assistance and capacity building activities that OJJDP designated TA provider sponsor or OJJDP approves. However, I don't see anything in here pertaining to a specific meeting or anything of that sort. So we would like for them to at least have those funds set aside just in case something shall arise. But like I said a few minutes ago, those funds can always be reallocated at a later date.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for looking that up.
You're welcome.
And Angela, I actually maybe have another question for you that just popped in. It was, what is the typical time frame for getting your revised budget approved?
Revised budget approval that either reinitiate or you initiate. The turnaround is based contingent upon if it needs to go back and forth for revisions. If you're sending in a revised budget request that's going to reallocate funds, as long as the justifications are clear and appropriate, the addition is correct, and everything from kind of checks out within the actual request, then it's normally a couple days to go through the process, because it has to be, initiated by the applicant, reviewed and approved by the program manager, and then it has to go to our supervisor, and then it goes to the deputy before it goes to OCFO for final approval, review and approval. So it's a 4 or 5 tier process. So I would give it at least 2 or 3 days for the final approval, and that's not including the questions or concerns that go back and forth between the program manager and the supervisor. So it could take 2 to 3 days for original approval without the back and forth conversations or requests for further information or justification or clarity, but it could take a week as well. So it's based contingent upon the needs.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Follow up. Yeah. I hope I explained that well.
Well, and just to reiterate too for everybody, if you do have questions about that process, if something arises that you do think there needs to be a change, or you're not sure how long it's supposed to take, definitely feel free to reach out to, whether it's Angela or Patrick that you're working with directly, but be sure to reach out to your program manager at OJJDP to get clarity on that process, and then to work with them on anything that OJJDP needs to ensure that process is completed.
Yes, to piggyback on that, that's what I was getting ready to chime in and say. It's always best to have that conversation via phone call, or the best way to reach Patrick or myself at this point is via email, so that we can read it and then we can have that conversation prior to you actually submitting the request, so that we can get our ducks in order before we actually submit the request. So the best way to resolve a situation like that is to have a conversation with your program manager, so that we can best guide you through the process.
All right, great, thank you. All right, are there any other, if there are any other questions, we'll go ahead and leave stay on for another minute here, so you can submit them through the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner, or the chat box that's also in the bottom right-hand corner. And as we mentioned before, there will be a follow-up webinar that dives a lot more into the grants management process, scheduled for sometime in January. So be on the lookout for that. Once we have it confirmed, we'll be able to send out the registration information for that, and your TA provider will be able to provide that to you as well. All right. We'll do one last scan for questions. All right. It doesn't look like there are any additional questions, but if there are, please don't hesitate to reach out. All of our contact information is up here, so you can reach out to your TA providers. If it's not a question that we can answer directly, we can definitely direct you to the correct person. Usually that means it's someone at OJJDP. If it is a grants management question, feel free to reach out to Angela or Patrick directly. So we'll go ahead and move.
This is Angela. Can I chime in one quick second?
Oh, of course.
While I do have everyone here, this is very, very important with us trying to review and get these budgets approved. We need to make sure that all point of contact and financial persons indicated in the grants management system, the GMS system, are correct, and that you guys please pay attention to those emails that come from either Patrick or myself, because we're trying to get these budgets cleared, and if you're not responding to our emails for further clarity or justification, then it's going to make it harder for us to get these budgets approved. So I just wanted to catch you guys while you are here to make sure that it's very important that we have the correct point of contact and financial person in our grants management system. If not, could you please make sure you get that done ASAP as we try to work through these budget clearances.
All right, thanks, Angela. That's a really good point. And so, yes, please make sure you get that information to them. And then if, your TA providers should have been in contact with you already, and if you're, for instance, if you haven't heard from a TA provider, it's possible that we have the wrong contact information. It could be someone who was working on this grant when you first submitted it, and now staffing has changed. So please take advantage of this webinar to reach out to folks if you haven't heard from them yet. All right. So we'll go ahead and conclude the webinar. I just want to say thank you again to Angela for contributing to the webinar and providing us with that information from OJJDP, and thank you to everyone who joined us today and submitted questions. So as I mentioned before, we are going to post this on our website. Once the webinar is posted, your TA provider can direct you to the recording. We will also have a PDF of all the slides presented today. Just as a reminder, you'll see up on the screen the link for our newsletter at csgjusticecenter.org/subscribe. Please subscribe to that. We provide a lot of important information through that newsletter. And thank you again for joining us today, and have a great day.